Before we speak about Machiavelli, we must correct a fundamental misunderstanding. Machiavelli is not important because he encouraged immorality. He is important because he refused self-deception. History does not remember those who comfort society. It remembers those who explain it. And Machiavelli explained something most people still resist today, that power does not operate according to ideals, intentions, or moral wishes. It operates according to human behaviour under pressure. This lecture is not about agreeing with Machiavelli, it is about learning how to think with clarity in a world that rewards realism. Let us begin with the environment that shaped him, because no psychology appears in isolation, and no philosophy emerges without pressure. Machiavelli was not born into abstraction, he was born into consequence. Florence, the city of his birth, is often remembered through paintings, cathedrals, sculptures, and poetry, yet this image hides a far harsher reality. Florence was a city admired for its beauty, yes, but internally unstable, politically fragile, constantly threatened by both internal factions and external powers. It was not a unified state with a fixed identity, but a living organism under continuous stress. Power in Florence was never settled. Governments did not endure long enough to become traditions. They rose quickly, governed briefly, and collapsed violently. Alliances were not commitments but temporary arrangements formed out of necessity and dissolved the moment circumstances shifted. Families rose to prominence only to disappear within a generation, not because they lacked virtue, but because they misjudged timing, underestimated rivals, or trusted stability that did not exist. This matters more than people realise. An environment like this does something specific to the human mind. It trains attention away from ideals and toward patterns. It teaches that consistency of values is not always rewarded, while consistency of perception often is. In such conditions, those who rely on moral predictability suffer repeatedly, while those who observe behavioural cycles, power movements, and incentive structures survive longer and occasionally thrive. This distinction matters. Machiavelli did not wake up cynical. Cynicism is emotional. What he developed was realism, and realism is cognitive. It is learned through repetition, through watching the same mistake produce the same collapse again and again, through seeing noble intentions fail against less noble, but more adaptive strategies. He watched promises dissolve not once but repeatedly. He watched loyalties reverse not as exceptions but as patterns. He observed mercy punished when it created weakness, hesitation exploited when it signalled indecision, and moral consistency used against those who assumed others shared it. Over time, a brutal but accurate lesson emerged, not as ideology but as evidence. Reality does not reward intention, it rewards adaptation. This is not pessimism, it is pattern recognition. When instability becomes normal, the mind stops asking what should happen and begins asking what does happen. This shift is the foundation of Machiavelli's entire worldview. Now we arrive at Machiavelli's central question, the one that guides all of his work, the one that quietly separates him from nearly every political thinker before him. He did not ask who deserved power, because he observed repeatedly that deserving power did not guarantee possessing it. He did not ask who was morally superior, because he saw moral superiority fail against strategic awareness. He did not ask who was most virtuous, because virtue alone did not prevent exile, imprisonment, or death. Instead, he asked something far more dangerous and far more useful. He asked why some individuals managed to keep power while others inevitably lost it. This question seems simple, but it is revolutionary. Most thinkers evaluate actions by motivation. They ask whether a leader meant well, whether intentions were pure, whether ideals were noble. Machiavelli did not ignore these questions, but he subordinated them. He judged actions by outcomes. If a decision led to stability, survival, and control, it was effective. If it led to chaos, rebellion, or collapse, it was flawed, regardless of how noble it appeared at the moment of decision. This is not cruelty. This is cause and effect thinking applied to human systems. In complex social environments, Intentions do not produce results. Structures do. Incentives do. Timing does. Perception does. Machiavelli understood that outcomes are not accidental. They follow patterns as reliably as physical laws, provided one studies them without emotional distortion. To understand Machiavelli, you must understand his view of human nature, because everything flows from it. And without this foundation, his conclusions appear harsh, even offensive. Machiavelli believed human beings are inconsistent, emotionally driven, self-interested, reactive to incentives, and more loyal to security than to ideals. This does not mean he believed people were evil. That interpretation is lazy. What he believed was that people are predictable under pressure. Pressure reveals priorities. When security is threatened, ideals bend. When survival is uncertain, loyalty becomes conditional. When power shifts, moral language often follows convenience. Machiavelli did not invent these observations. He recorded them. And predictability, once understood, becomes the foundation of strategy. You cannot plan around how people wish they would behave. Wishes dissolve under risk. You cannot plan around stated values alone, because values are often aspirational rather than operative. You can only plan around how people actually behave when risk appears, when fear is introduced, when incentives change, when loss becomes possible. This is why Machiavelli emphasized structure, perception, discipline, and control. These are not tools of oppression. Despite how they are often framed, they are tools of stability. Structure reduces uncertainty. Perception shapes behavior before action is required. Discipline prevents emotional reaction from overriding judgment. Control limits chaos before chaos spreads. In unstable systems, these qualities do not create tyranny. They prevent collapse. Machiavelli understood that people do not rebel simply because leaders are strict. They rebel when systems become unpredictable, when authority hesitates, when signals are unclear, when boundaries dissolve. In such environments, fear grows not from control, but from its absence. This is the core of Machiavelli's realism. He was not teaching how to dominate people. He was teaching how to prevent disorder in a world that naturally drifts toward it. And once you understand this, his philosophy stops sounding immoral and starts sounding structural. He was not asking how leaders should feel. He was asking how systems remain intact under stress. That is why Machiavelli remains relevant, not because we admire his conclusions, but because the conditions that produce them have never disappeared. Now we must slow down, deliberately, carefully, because this is where Machiavelli is most often misunderstood, misquoted, and emotionally rejected. The idea of fear and love. This single idea has done more damage to Machiavelli's reputation than any other, not because it is cruel, but because it is precise, and precision unsettles people who prefer comforting ambiguity. When Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if one cannot be both, he was not encouraging violence, intimidation, or tyranny. He was describing a psychological reality about reliability. Reliability, not morality, is what people unconsciously seek when their security is at stake. Love is conditional. Love fluctuates. Love responds to mood, benefit, convenience, shared interest, and emotional climate. Fear, when structured and controlled, does not fluctuate. It is rooted in expectation. It is rooted in consequence. It is rooted in predictability. And predictability, whether we like it or not, is the foundation of order. In leadership, in authority, in organizations, and even in personal relationships, people feel safest not with the most affectionate figure, but with the most consistent one. The person who reacts the same way today as they did yesterday. The person whose boundaries do not shift depending on emotion. The person whose rules are clear, enforced, and stable. A leader who is loved but inconsistent creates anxiety, because affection without structure feels unreliable. People begin to wonder which version of the leader they will encounter, the generous one or the distracted one, the forgiving one or the resentful one. This uncertainty erodes trust faster than severity ever could. By contrast, a leader who is firm, clear, and dependable creates order, even if admiration is limited. People may not adore such a leader, but they understand them, and understanding reduces fear far more effectively than charm. Machiavelli was not choosing fear because it is pleasant. He was choosing it because it is stable. This distinction matters enormously because most people think Machiavelli was choosing emotional dominance, when in reality, he was choosing psychological clarity. Fear, in Machiavelli's framework, is not screaming, humiliating, or terrorizing. It is consequence without ambiguity. It is expectation without illusion. It is the removal of guesswork. And guesswork is what destabilizes systems. Now, once we understand this, we can move to the next concept that is almost always misunderstood alongside fear, and that is decisiveness. Machiavelli observed something that modern psychology later confirmed, that prolonged uncertainty causes more psychological damage than a single decisive outcome, even when that outcome is unpleasant. Uncertainty drains mental energy. Uncertainty spreads anxiety. Uncertainty invites resistance. Uncertainty weakens authority from the inside out. When a situation remains unresolved, people begin to imagine worst-case scenarios. Rumours grow, power fragments, confidence erodes, the mind fills the vacuum with fear, speculation, and projection. A clear decision, by contrast, even an unpopular one, closes psychological loops. It tells people where they stand. It removes ambiguity. It restores orientation. This is why Machiavelli believed that cruelty, if it must exist, should be done all at once, not stretched endlessly across time. Not because cruelty is good, but because prolonged harm corrodes systems far more than contained harm ever could. This idea applies far beyond politics. In leadership, hesitation communicates weakness, not because people are cruel, but because they interpret hesitation as lack of clarity. In business, delayed decisions stall momentum and invite internal conflict. In personal relationships, unclear boundaries breed resentment, confusion, and quiet hostility. Indecision is not neutrality, it is slow erosion of control. And here is the part that most people resist hearing. Decisiveness does not require certainty, it requires responsibility. Waiting for perfect information is often just fear disguised as prudence. Machiavelli understood that action shapes reality far more than contemplation ever will. Now let us move to another idea that feels modern. Even though Machiavelli articulated it centuries ago, the power of appearance. Machiavelli understood that people do not respond to inner truth. They respond to visible signals. They respond to what they can observe, interpret, and project meaning onto. Reputation shapes expectation. Expectation shapes behaviour. Behaviour reinforces reputation. This loop operates whether we acknowledge it or not. A leader who is inwardly capable but outwardly chaotic will not be trusted. A leader who is imperfect but appears stable will inspire confidence. This is not hypocrisy, it is psychology. Machiavelli never argued that a leader must be perfect. He argued that a leader must appear stable, competent, and controlled. This does not mean constant deception. It means understanding that perception is not superficial. It is functional. Human beings cannot see your intentions. They cannot measure your inner virtue. They can only interpret signals. Power in practice depends less on what you are and more on what others believe you are capable of doing. This is uncomfortable, but it is true. And refusing to accept it does not make you moral, it makes you invisible. Now at this point, we must confront Machiavelli's personal contradiction, because it contains one of the most important lessons of all. Machiavelli understood power deeply, yet he rarely possessed it. He advised rulers, observed kings, analysed systems, but spent much of his life outside the structures he understood so well. This tells us something crucial, something many people miss. Understanding power does not automatically grant authority. It grants immunity to illusion. Machiavelli's tragedy was not failure, it was clarity without position. He could see through appearances, but he lacked the leverage to act on that vision. And this is dangerous if misunderstood. Seeing reality clearly without building strength can lead to bitterness instead of mastery. It can create cynicism instead of capability. It can produce detachment rather than effectiveness. This is why Machiavelli must be paired with self-discipline, not resentment. Clarity alone is not enough. Awareness without structure corrodes. Insight without embodiment isolates. Machiavelli teaches us that seeing the world clearly is only the first step. The second step is building the internal discipline, emotional control, competence and positioning required to act without being consumed by what you see. This is the part most people ignore. They read Machiavelli and become cynical instead of strategic. They become suspicious instead of grounded. They see manipulation everywhere and lose trust in everything. That is not mastery. That is disorientation. Machiavelli was not asking you to hate people. He was asking you to stop idealizing them. He was not asking you to abandon morality. He was asking you to stop confusing morality with naivety. The real lesson hidden inside Machiavelli's work is this: if you do not understand how power operates, power will operate on you, regardless of how ethical you believe yourself to be. Fear, decisiveness, appearance, and clarity are not tools of domination. They are tools of orientation. They allow you to move through systems without illusion. They allow you to set boundaries without guilt. They allow you to lead without chaos. And most importantly, they allow you to master yourself before attempting to influence others. That is where Machiavelli truly begins. If you want, next we can expand this same section even further into a full psychological masterclass, connected explicitly to modern leadership and personal power, or continue expanding the lecture into the next phase of Machiavelli's thought. Just tell me how you want to proceed. Let us slow this down, because this is the point where most people misunderstand Machiavelli, misuse him, or reject him entirely. The question is not whether Machiavelli is right or wrong. The question is whether you understand what he was actually trying to protect you from. Because Machiavelli did not write for tyrants. He wrote for people who kept losing power, influence, safety, and autonomy because they misunderstood reality. When people accuse Machiavelli of promoting coldness, manipulation, or cynicism, they reveal something about themselves. They are reading him emotionally, not strategically. They are reacting to the discomfort of seeing human nature described without decoration. Machiavelli does not teach you how to exploit others first. He teaches you how not to be exploited. That is the distinction that changes everything. His ideas are defensive before they are offensive, protective before they are aggressive, clarifying before they are empowering. He teaches awareness before dominance, perception before action, discipline before ambition, precisely because ambition without awareness leads to destruction. Most people who become manipulative were not trained by Machiavelli. They were hurt by reality and never learned how to understand it. Machiavelli offers understanding instead of resentment. Now let us unpack what correct application actually means. When Machiavelli teaches awareness before dominance, he is teaching you to stop confusing intention with outcome. He is asking you to observe what people do when incentives change, not what they claim to value when nothing is at stake. In real life, people reveal themselves under pressure, not in comfort. They reveal priorities when resources are limited, status is threatened, or security is uncertain. Machiavelli asks you to pay attention to those moments, not to speeches, promises, or self-descriptions. This is not distrust. This is realism. Trust that is not grounded in observation is not trust. It is projection. To observe before trusting does not mean assuming the worst in people. It means postponing emotional investment until patterns are visible. It means allowing behavior to speak louder than language. Machiavelli understood that premature trust does not make you virtuous. It makes you predictable. And predictability is dangerous in environments where power, incentives, and self-interest exist, which is to say everywhere. When Machiavelli emphasizes controlling emotional reactions before responding, he is not advocating emotional suppression. He is advocating emotional delay. There is a difference. Emotions are information. They tell you what matters, where your boundaries are, where threats or opportunities may exist. But emotions are terrible decision makers in the moment they arise. Anger narrows vision. Fear accelerates conclusions. Desire exaggerates benefit. Ego distorts risk. Machiavelli teaches that the person who reacts immediately surrenders control to whoever provoked the reaction. The calm individual, the one who pauses, observes, and chooses timing, quietly takes control of the interaction. This is not manipulation. This is self-command. Most power imbalances begin internally, not externally. They begin the moment you feel compelled to respond before you understand what is happening. Machiavelli teaches patience not as passivity, but as leverage. Now we come to timing, one of Machiavelli's most subtle lessons. Choosing timing over impulse is one of the clearest markers of strategic maturity. Impulse feels honest, courageous, and authentic. Timing feels calculated, slow, and sometimes uncomfortable. But timing is what separates survival from collapse. History is full of people who are morally correct and strategically premature. They spoke too early, acted too fast, challenged power before understanding its structure, revealed intentions before securing position. Machiavelli understood that truth delivered at the wrong moment is not truth. It is self-sabotage. Timing does not mean deception. It means sequencing. You do not reveal everything you know the moment you know it. You do not confront every issue the moment it arises. You do not declare ambition before building leverage. Machiavelli teaches that those who rush toward expression often walk directly into traps built for the impatient. Building competence before demanding respect is another area where Machiavelli is deeply misunderstood. Many people want respect because they feel morally right, emotionally invested, or intellectually superior. Machiavelli would say none of that matters unless competence is visible. Respect does not come from self-assertion. It comes from demonstrated capability. People may nod at your words, but they submit to your effectiveness. This does not mean arrogance, it means preparation. Machiavelli understood that authority without competence creates resentment, while competence without authority eventually attracts power. This is why he valued discipline so highly. Discipline builds skill, skill builds confidence, confidence builds stability, stability attracts influence. Demanding respect before earning it reverses the natural order of power and creates silent opposition. Resolving conflict instead of avoiding it is another misunderstood principle. Machiavelli observed that unresolved conflict drains energy, spreads anxiety, and invites external interference. Avoidance feels peaceful, but it quietly erodes authority. When conflict is delayed indefinitely, it does not disappear. It reorganizes itself and returns stronger, more complex and less controllable. Machiavelli's preference for decisiveness is not rooted in cruelty. It is rooted in closure. A conflict resolved cleanly allows systems to stabilize. A conflict avoided indefinitely destabilizes everything around it. This principle applies to leadership, organizations, families, and personal boundaries. The longer a boundary violation is tolerated, the harder it becomes to enforce. Decisiveness, in this sense, is an act of responsibility. Now we must address the most sensitive part of Machiavelli's application, separating personal morality from strategic necessity without abandoning ethics altogether. This is where shallow readings collapse. Machiavelli never argued that leaders should abandon morality. He argued that leaders must understand that moral intentions do not shield them from immoral actions by others. The danger is not morality. The danger is moral naivety. If you assume everyone will act according to your values, you are not ethical. You are exposed. Machiavelli teaches compartmentalization, not corruption. He asks you to understand when ethical ideals apply and when strategic awareness is required to preserve those ideals. There are moments when honesty builds trust. There are moments when honesty destroys leverage. Wisdom lies in distinguishing between the two. Ethics without awareness collapse under pressure. Awareness without ethics corrodes character. Machiavelli's real challenge is integration. This is why correct application of Machiavelli does not lead to domination, it leads to freedom from illusion. Those who understand human nature clearly do not need to control others aggressively. They anticipate behavior, design environments, and avoid unnecessary conflict. They stop expecting the world to conform to their hopes. They stop being shocked by predictable outcomes. They stop personalizing systemic behavior. This alone creates a sense of calm power that does not require intimidation. Machiavelli remains relevant because human psychology has not changed. Technology evolved, institutions grew complex, language became softer, but fear still drives decisions. Desire still distorts judgment. Insecurity still fuels aggression. Ambition still overrides ethics under pressure. Self-interest still shapes behavior more reliably than values. Those who refuse to understand this do not become moral. They become vulnerable. They misinterpret aggression as confidence. They mistake charm for loyalty. They confuse intention with outcome. They trust narratives instead of patterns. And when reality corrects them, they call it betrayal instead of miscalculation. Those who understand human nature do not need to dominate. They do not need to manipulate. They do not need to harden emotionally. They simply stop being controlled by illusion. This is the deepest lesson Machiavelli offers, not how to rule others, but how to remain internally sovereign in a world that quietly exploits the unaware. Machiavelli does not make you cruel. He makes you awake. An awakening at first feels uncomfortable, but over time, it produces something far more valuable than power over others. It produces self-command. And self-command is the foundation of all durable power.